I've been hyping this video up for like 6 months now, but I finally decided to sit down and rewatch High School DxD for the first time in a few years, to see if I still think it's good, and to see if any opinions of mine have changed. And after finishing the first season, I must say that they are off to an incredible start. This season was honestly better than I expected. I mean, there wasn't really much that I didn't like. There's really only one major problem, and then a few little minor things, but other than that, this season was extremely enjoyable. The story was really interesting, and it makes you go through a roller coaster of emotions. The characters are all pretty likable for the most part, and honestly some of them peak in this season. The fights were a little mid, but they make up for that with the emotions that they make you feel throughout the fight. And of course, the music of this season is actually peak. The openings, endings, and OSTs were also perfect, and they fit so well into this season. Those are the main points that I'm going to hit in this video. It really is a shame that no one really talks about these aspects of High School DxD, but that's what I'm here for. I truly believe that High School DxD's first season is a classic and underrated. So this season is about Issei as he gets the hang of being a devil, and I kinda like how premature this feels. I really like the idea that we get to see Issei progress as a character. As the story goes on, he becomes a more and more competent and powerful devil. But even by the end of the first season, Issei really isn't that strong, and I really love that because it makes you want to keep watching. It makes you want to see the full potential of Issei, since they don't just give it all to you. It's just really fun to see Issei having to overcome obstacles in new and innovative ways, and I really appreciate this season for this, and you kind of start to miss it as the series goes on. This season does start off a little weird. The first episode has way too much happening in it, but like I said in a previous video, that's really only a problem for about half the episode. But let me tell you everything that happens in this episode just so you can understand what I mean. So the episode opens up with Issei talking to himself about Rias. After that, we cut to Issei just hanging out with his friends Matsuda and Motohama, and while they're doing that, we get introduced to a few characters on the way, like Kiba. His friends decide to start being weird, and they go to peep in on a girl's locker room in a pretty unnecessary scene. Then after that, we get our first actual scene with the main girl, Rias, and her friend Akino. We cut to Issei as he's being asked out by a random girl that he doesn't know, Yuma Amano. Issei accepts her feelings, and then they officially start dating. Then we cut again to a scene of Issei and Yuma planning a date together. We still aren't even done. Cut to another scene of Rias, where we find out she's spying on Issei. I'll get into this scene later. Then after that, we cut back to Issei and Yuma where they finally go on their date. Then cut to after their date where Issei and Yuma are walking. And then of course Yuma turns into the fallen angel Rainier and kills Issei. And then we get like a repeat scene of the very first scene we saw on the show, which is actually kind of a really nice scene. So all of that you could really fit into an entire episode of a show. But no, we're still only 12 minutes into the episode. This is the halfway point of the episode. How is it even possible to fit that much into half of an episode? It's almost off-putting how much happens in that first episode. The pacing is just way too fast, but like I said, it gets a lot better after Rainier kills Issei. And then the season as a whole gets way better after the first episode. The pacing slows down to a reasonable level, and the entire watch becomes way more enjoyable, which is something High School DxD is always really good about, making the experience enjoyable. It's a very enjoyable anime, and even when we did have like 100 things happening in that first episode, they still made it entertaining, and it was still a fun watch, which again is something High School DxD does really well. We get actual funny moments throughout the series. I've seen High School DxD like a whole bunch of times. I've seen it enough to where I can remember everything that happens, even though I haven't watched it in a few years, but they were still able to make me laugh throughout this entire season. And the comedy really adds to the whole watching experience, and it really is one of the best things they do. They have so many episodes that just have me dying. Even the little filler episodes where the characters aren't really doing anything, those episodes are really entertaining. Like episode 6. In episode 6, it's just Issei and Rias just helping random people with a bunch of random stuff. But this episode is actually one of the funniest anime episodes I've ever watched. It was just so entertaining, and I didn't think I would still find the jokes in High School DxD funny. But somehow I do. They know how to make the viewing experience fun, and the dub just adds to it. The DxD dub is actually one of the funniest things ever made. And I would know, I literally make videos where I recreate the anime using the DxD dub script. And it is so hard to read that script without laughing. There are times in those videos where you can hear me laughing. Literally in the first scene of that DxD dub video that I made, you can hear me let out a little laugh. The dub is just so hilarious. And I've already made 2 videos on it, going through a bunch of scenes, but I definitely recommend watching the anime dubbed every single time, because it's not just good because it's funny, but it's also able to keep that emotional value. It's able to be funny while still being emotional, and that's something that can be really hard to pull off when you have an anime this funny. Even through these serious moments, they're able to capture the emotions through the dub. You get a really good balance of emotion and comedy in this season. And for the people who refuse to watch anime dub, the sub is also pretty funny, and it's also still able to keep the emotions. So either way, you're getting a decent experience. But the comedy really only is one part of the tone of the series. It's not just a full comedy anime. And again, it does a really good job at balancing the tone, keeping the anime funny while also giving us emotional moments. There aren't really any times where I feel like the tone was off, and there aren't any moments where the tone gets ruined by a bad joke. That kind of becomes a problem later in the series, but for this season specifically, they do a really good job at keeping the tone consistent. And that's really important for this season because this is one of the more serious and emotional seasons. This season is filled with emotional moments, and they're able to keep that serious atmosphere up until the right moment. And this is most prevalent in the fights. Like I said earlier, the fights in this season aren't really that impressive. I mean, the Rainier fight is really just Issei missing a few attacks and then beating Rainier with one punch. None of the fights in the rated game really stood out as fights, and the only fight that I would call good is Issei versus Riser at the wedding. Despite this, pretty much every fight was enjoyable for a few reasons. One of them is the emotions that came from these fights. I already talked about the Rainier fight. That fight was definitely my favorite in this season, and I made a whole video about it where I go into a lot of details, but that whole moment is just done so well. And it's not done well because the fight is interesting, it's done well because of the amount of emotion that you feel while watching the fight. Killing Asya off before the fight even starts is just a crazy move that just adds that level of emotion to it. And probably my favorite small little detail from this fight is Issei starting the fight praying to God and ending the fight praying to the devil. And that is just art to me. And the ending of this fight is what makes the fight as good as it is. The emotions conveyed through Issei's dialogue and animation just makes the scene so perfect. Even though I've already seen the fight and I already knew the outcome, I still felt the emotions. And that's because as a viewer, you're attached to Issei. You watch Issei have one goal in mind to protect Asya, but he just can't do it. He fails time and time again to protect her. And even though Issei won the fight, he still failed to protect Asya, so he didn't really win the fight. He didn't necessarily care about Rainier. He just wanted to save Asya. And the scene after Rainier gets killed does an amazing job at showing this. We see how broken Issei is after the whole situation, and you can see Rainier's trauma just being implemented into Issei's mind. And you just can't help but to feel bad for Issei. It's such an amazing scene, and there's so much to talk about with this scene. And like I said, the fight isn't good because it's flashy and characters are throwing hands. It's good because the emotions conveyed and the story being told. We see this trauma come back to bite Issei. There is a story being told right here. The Riser rating game is another really good fight, and it is legitimately surprising. And that's really because of the stakes. The winner of the rating game gets Rias, so basically Rias' life is on the line here. The stakes just make the fight so much more intense. There's just no universe where you would picture the main characters losing this fight, especially when you see Issei running through Riser's pieces, but they do. Issei almost gets killed by Riser and Rias resigns the game. And the scene where Rias resigns the game is so good, it always gives me chills. It's one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. I mean, it's just so dramatic.
I resign, okay? I resign. Please, just let him go.
The combination of the editing, the voice acting, the animation, and OST just makes for an incredible moment, and it really feels like Issei is going to win that fight. I mean, he was giving a whole speech about Rias. It really felt like he was going to pull something out, but it just doesn't happen, and it's such a good moment that's actually surprising. Surprises like these just add to the emotion that they already do so well. It's just like a 1-2 combo, and the surprises plus the emotions help boost the whole series overall. You don't expect Issei to fail to save Asya, you don't expect Asya to die, you don't expect Issei to be that weak compared to Riser's pieces, you don't expect Koneko to get blasted immediately, you don't expect Rias to lose the rating game. There are just so many surprises that are genuinely surprising, and it kind of makes you start to second guess the outcome of some events. And that unpredictability, again, just adds to the watching experience. It leaves you wondering how the next event is going to end, and it just adds so much emotion to the series. But the best fight in this series is definitely Issei versus Riser. This is an actual good fight, and again, it plays with your emotions the whole time, just like all the other fights. You think Issei's gonna win the fight when he has this armor on, because it's supposed to be this legendary armor, and he was holding his own against Riser too. But then the timer runs out on his armor, and then it kind of becomes like a uh-oh moment. You're wondering how is he gonna beat him now without the armor. And the way Issei beat Riser was also done really well. He beat him in a way that makes sense. He used holy items, which is the devil's weakness. I also love the callback where Issei uses the things he learns from his training to beat Riser. And I also love how it doesn't just come out of nowhere. We get a scene where Asuya explains the things that Issei uses to beat Riser. And this is something High School DxD also does really well. Even in the light novel, pretty much everything is foreshadowed or it's hinted at. I mean, they hint at things like Riser's appearance. They use little details like Rias' expression. They also hint at future events like Volley. They literally give us a hint at the rating game between Rias and Sona, which doesn't happen because of a specific studio. And then of course, they hint at how Issei is going to beat Riser. So they do a surprisingly good job at not making things come out of nowhere in this season. And it's a small thing, but I appreciate it because it makes the rewatch experience a lot better. When you rewatch a scene, you're like, oh wait, that's them telling us that this is about to happen. Another moment I really liked was the moment between Issei and Rias after the Riser fight. This might actually be the best moment. I think it's the best moment between Issei and Rias. It feels like a really nice conclusion to the journey, while at the same time making you want to see more of Issei and Rias. It lets us know that Issei has a chance with Rias, and honestly the moments where Issei's with Rias are probably the best in this season. Even the last scene of this season, it's a nice callback from when the first time Issei saw Rias, and it kind of warmed my heart when I saw it. The scenes with Rias are executed so well, and they really make you start caring for Rias. But one of the best moments between Issei and Rias is the talk that they have before the rating game with Riser. This moment does a very good job at not only making us kind of feel bad for Issei, but also showing how good of a leader Rias is, and making Rias feel legit. Because really up until now, Rias hasn't done anything. She has a nice aura built around her, but we don't really get to see it. But in this scene, this is when that aura kind of starts to feel legit. This long talk basically just tells us everything we need to know about Rias. It tackles one of the biggest problems that Issei comes across as a character. Throughout this entire season, we see Issei fail over and over again. Even with small things like getting a pact, Issei couldn't do it. His confidence takes a big hit from this, and we start to see it kind of creep into his mind. He's constantly feeling like he's gonna let people down or disappoint them. I mean, the whole reason he walked into that house with Freed was because he didn't want to disappoint Rias. And he did that even though he got the feeling that he shouldn't be in that house. He was that desperate to do something to not disappoint Rias. And as the story continues, we see Issei fail more and more. And these failures just creep into his mind until he finally breaks down to Rias. We get to fully see the effects of him constantly failing, and I love this. I love it because it doesn't come out of nowhere. We get to see it. We see Issei fail. We see his confidence get smaller and smaller until the eventual breaking point. I think my favorite time when we see it is during the training episode where Issei uses his dragon shot for the first time. When Issei uses his dragon shot, he hesitates for a second. And that's because when he sees it, it doesn't look very strong. So because that power looks so small, he thinks he's still weak. He doesn't realize how strong he actually is. And again, it's just a really good way to show that Issei is lacking in confidence. I love small little details like that. It really makes the show just that much more enjoyable. And since I'm already here, I might as well just go ahead and talk about Issei. Again, the whole time we're just following Issei as he's getting used to being a devil, and this is one of the best things they do in this season. We get to see Issei grow as a fighter throughout the entire season. He starts off not even knowing how to activate his sacred gear, and he makes a realistic amount of progress throughout the time he's been training. I mean, again, he's not that strong when this series ends, and it makes sense because he didn't train that much. It really makes you want to see more of him, and it makes you want to see him grow even stronger. Like, I love how we get a whole episode dedicated to Issei's training. Instead of them just skipping over it, we get to see what he's learning, and it all makes it worth it when Issei uses the thing he learns from his friends to beat Riser. It all comes back full circle. Issei's progression as a fighter is done really nicely here, and I was pleasantly surprised by it. It makes you like the character a lot more when you're able to watch them grow, and it adds a sense of relatability to Issei. Issei doesn't just walk in the show and become the strongest character, he actually has to work for it, and that's exactly how it should be. It makes him feel like a real person, and that's that's probably the best thing they do with Issei's character. He feels like a real character in this season, and it adds to us seeing Issei grow as a character. It's just beautifully done. I mean, Issei goes through real life struggles. He struggles with his confidence. Even that first scene where Issei dies, Issei says, "I know I've lived a shallow life." He's a very self-aware person. And these struggles that Issei has with his confidence, with saving people, even with just talking to girls, it all just makes him so much more relatable, and it makes you want to cheer for him because he's not a perfect character. He doesn't just walk in and have it all figured out. We actually have to watch him figure it out for himself. And that's the best thing they do with Issei's character. And it's sadly overlooked by the fans and people who watch the anime. Issei's character was definitely a highlight of this season. There were times where I was calling Issei my twin. That's how much I was liking him. But unfortunately, there were times where Issei was kind of annoying. The only knock I have about Issei's character is when he's in his perverted mode. When Issei's being a pervert, peeping in girls' locker rooms, just being weird, I don't like him. Some of the smaller moments of Issei being perverted are a little funny, but when the joke doesn't hit, it kind of just comes off as unnecessary, and it becomes a little bit harder to root for Issei. And I also think it subtracts a few of those relatability points too. And honestly, I can really see why that's a turnoff for so many people. But other than that, I really enjoyed Issei's character. And I was decently surprised by how well he was written in this season. I mean, obviously he's not some super complex character, but he's not a bad character either. Watching him grow is just such a nice experience, and it feels like we're on a journey. And since we're watching him grow, we care about him more, and since we care about him more, it makes the scenes more emotional. We feel the same way Issei feels. So when Issei breaks down to Rias about how he feels like a failure, it just works so well because again, we saw this all build up and we can just feel for Issei. One of the most important parts of making a scene emotional is the characters and the connection the audience has to those characters. And we have that connection with Issei because again, it's built throughout the entire story. They also do a really good job with Asya and Rias in this season. Asya, just like Issei, is a character that we can feel for. Her backstory is really sad, and her character, just like Issei, feels real. She was abandoned by her parents as a child, picked up by the church, and then she was kicked out and shunned by that same exact church that took her in. She's never had any friends, and everyone she's ever known has abandoned her. So when she meets Issei, someone who's actually willing to talk to her and be friends with her, it makes sense that she would be so attached to him. Her shyness makes sense because of how everyone has treated her in her life. Almost everything about Asya's character makes sense, and it makes her feel realistic, just like Issei. Asya is like Issei's little sister in this season, and all he wants to do is protect her. But when he fails, we feel the pain, because we don't only care for Issei, but we also care for Asya. And this might be where Asya's character peaks. And I almost want to say the same thing about Rias, but I don't know if I can. Rias in this season is at her most interesting. Issei clearly likes her, but it doesn't really feel like he has a chance with her until the very end. And again, that's something I really enjoyed. Rias doesn't just walk in and like Issei. Issei kind of claws his way into her mind with the moments they share together. Moments like the one during the training episode, in episode 6, the rating game. These moments make Rias feel like a legitimate character. And all these moments are in the second half. Second half of season 1, Rias was something special. Her aura and leadership makes you want to see more of her and her peerage. She comes off as the strongest person on the team, and that's something that I find myself missing the further I get into the series. And Rias is at her best when she has this aura. It feels like no matter who they're up against, there's always a chance of winning because Rias is there. She really is an enjoyable character to watch. Even in the little filler episode with Issei, she was so fun to watch, and she had some really funny moments. Rias as a whole was a really interesting character to watch, and she was almost a complete character in this season. And I say almost because of one problem, and I think this problem is the biggest knock I have on this season. I really don't like how Rias was portrayed in the first 3 episodes. It's so strange. She comes off as a psychopath. It feels like she's a villain. And I think the reason for that is because of a moment that the anime added that I don't think was supposed to be there. And it's this scene right here.
I see.
You were right, 100%.
Yeah, you totally called it. I'm just glad I asked you two to keep a close eye on him.
Yep.
What's next? What do we do with him now?
We need to make our preparations immediately. That's all we can do. Everything else depends on him.
This scene right here is what's holding Rias back from probably being the best character in this season. It really makes you question her character, and it makes you question her as a person. Issei describes Rias as the most kind-hearted person he's ever seen, someone who will do anything for her team, but that vibe just isn't there in the first 3 episodes. This so-called kind-hearted person just let our main character die even though she knew Rainier was about to kill him, and it almost feels manipulative. It feels like she set the whole thing up. It comes off as Rias letting Issei die just so she can take him in and use his power. And I know that's not what they were going for here, but that's exactly how it's seen when you have clips of her stalking Issei and talking about how she's already set everything up. I really hate that they added that scene in here. I'm not 100% sure if this scene was in the light novel because I don't remember it being there, and Rias definitely didn't feel this manipulative in the light novel either. So this is how it goes in the light novel, if I remember correctly. Rias does not follow Issei at all when Rainier is talking to him. She has no idea that this is even happening. Once Issei's on the date with Rainier, he gets the flyer from Rias' familiar, then obviously he puts it in his pocket. And then after Rainier kills him, Issei somehow summons Rias. And then that's when Rias notices that Issei has potential, and so she decides to take him in. That makes so much more sense, and it even makes more sense in the context of the anime, because in the anime, Issei taking the flyer doesn't really make sense. Like, if either way Rias was gonna step in and save Issei last minute, taking the flyer changes nothing, and it's just a useless scene. So that makes me think that this is something that the anime messed up, and it really does hurt Rias' character. And Rias being the biggest asshole to Issei doesn't help at all either. She's always yelling at him for something, and it just feels so out of character, to the point where even Akeno calls it out. And then it becomes even weirder when later in the season, one of Rias' goals is to make sure Issei doesn't lose confidence. She is legitimately the biggest reason why Issei is lacking in confidence in the first place. Again, he walked into that house with Freed just so he can impress her. So when she says stuff like, I don't want him to lose his confidence, it just doesn't make sense, because she's the biggest reason for his lack of confidence. It's just very weird, and Rias really doesn't feel like Rias in these first few episodes. Luckily that changes, she does a complete 180, and she becomes an extremely lovable character, and a character that I can actually root for. They really saved her character after the fight with Rainier. If it wasn't for those first few episodes, Rias would be the best character in this season. And there's not really much to say about the other characters. Kiba and Konako are pretty cool in this season. They're always there to help Issei. They're both likable, but they don't really do much. And I won't really knock them for that because they get their moments later in the series. But a character I do want to talk about is Akeno. I did not care for Akeno at all in this season. She was by far the worst character in the group this season. After watching the full season, I just sat there trying to figure out what Akeno did. You could take Akeno out of this entire season and nothing changes. And she really wasn't even that enjoyable to watch. I mean, they didn't even try to make her funny or anything, and she just doesn't do anything. I was so disappointed in how they handled Akeno this season. And it really is a shame, because when they care about Akeno, when they actually spend time on Akeno's character, she is the best character in the series. But when they don't, she falls so low. It's so crazy. But besides for Issei, Asya, and Rias, none of the characters really stuck out. And again, that's fine, since they don't get their moments until later in the series. But this season did have some pretty good villains. Rainier is obviously the fan favorite, and her initial appearance as a villain isn't really special. I do love how you can already see her impact on Issei's mind, and how it starts off with small things like his confidence being lowered, but as the series progresses it becomes more and more apparent. It's kind of hard to explain why she's a good villain while only using this season. The trauma she inflicts on Issei is what makes her such a loved villain, but we don't really learn about that trauma until later, so it's kind of hard to explain. But again, that moment where Rias kills her is just so good, and you can just see how much she affected Issei. When it comes to impact on the main character, no villain comes close to her. The other major villain was Riser, and I actually didn't hate Riser in this season. Riser is another character that kind of feels real, and I don't think you can even call Riser a villain. I mean, Riser is obnoxiously arrogant. Like, this dude thinks he's the main character. I mean, he literally says his name when he enters a room. But the thing is, Riser's arrogance makes complete sense. Who wouldn't be arrogant if they've never lost a fight? Who wouldn't be arrogant if you were immortal and could heal from almost anything? It makes complete sense, and the character arc he goes through where he becomes a lot more humble also makes sense. because again, he's not really a villain, he's just overly confident. And you see that confidence break a little when he was beating up on Issei. That's also one of the moments I really liked, and a small detail I really liked. When Riser was put in a situation where he wasn't 100% sure he could win, he started to crack. He started to try to bend the rules, he tried killing Issei, because that's kind of just how it is. That first loss you take is always tough. And because I could actually understand why Riser was so confident, I didn't hate him. And this is something else that High School DxD did really good in this season. So many characters just feel realistic. They even have a villain that feels realistic. And of course, it wouldn't be a DxD video without me mentioning Freed. I think Freed is kind of at his worst in this season. I really wish they wouldn't use scenes of him being a creep to show us that he's evil. Like, we can tell he's evil by his voice and by his actions. We don't need to see him touching Asuya to know that he's an evil character. I really don't like when anime uses that to show that a character is evil because it feels so cheap. That's like the easiest way to get the audience to turn on a character. And I wish they would just be more creative with it. Like, you don't see Frieza out here touching on girls. So you can make a character evil without having them be a creep. But other than that, his character was still entertaining, and his dub, of course, was funny. And overall, I would say the villains in this season were pretty good. Not too much to complain about there. But by far the most underrated aspect of High School DxD is the music. High School DxD has some of the best music I've ever heard in any anime. They really didn't need to go this hard with the OSTs. I'm always so disappointed when I watch other anime and they don't have a banger OST playing. These OSTs just make the scene so much more dramatic. I mean, just look at this scene.
Riser, please stop! Let him go! I resign, okay? I resign. Please just let him go.
The biggest reason for this scene being as dramatic as it is due to the OST. I mean, just imagine this scene with no OST. Or imagine this scene with a different OST. It just wouldn't work. All of their OSTs were made to fit a certain theme, and they have OSTs that only work for that said theme. You can't just throw any OST anywhere. They fit so well into the series. They have so many OSTs. Just for this season, they have 54 different OSTs. That is insane, and they just keep adding to it as the series goes on. Season 2 has 22 OSTs, Season 3 has 36, Season 4 has 34. That's a total of 144 unique OSTs throughout the series, and I really love how much effort they put into it. They have so many OSTs that when you hear, you think of a certain character. Like, obviously, when you hear that one OST, you think of Rias. When you hear that jazzy OST, you think of Akano. When you hear that light, high-pitched OST, you think of Asuya. And it just adds so much to the experience. And they really didn't need to go that hard with the OSTs. And then, of course, the same goes for the openings and endings. The opening for High School DxD is a banger. That's no surprise. I think everyone likes it. I haven't really heard anyone that said they didn't like it. And it really does a good job at giving us some details, but not showing us too much. If you just watch the opening without watching the anime, you wouldn't really know what's going on. But by the time you get to like episode 11, everything starts to make sense. And it's just really cool to see. And then, of course, there's the ending. And I think the ending is just an anime fan favorite. I swear I see people use this ending for their video intros and video outros. It's basically an anime classic at this point. And it's also just a good ending. It's really entertaining. And I mean, that can really be said about the entire first season of High School DxD. It's extremely entertaining and enjoyable to watch. It's able to make you laugh throughout the series, no matter how many times you watch it. It's filled with emotional moments that are able to bring out as many feelings as possible. They have characters that feel like real people, characters that actually make sense, fights that have genuine surprises and that make the watch so unpredictable. And then, of course, the OSTs multiply this experience by 100. All of these things just flow so well together, and it makes the story feel like a journey. They're able to balance emotions with comedy. They're able to make us care about our main character by making us watch him grow. All these things are what makes this season so special. I didn't think this season was going to be as good as it was, and honestly, I don't ever hear anyone really talk about this as the best season, when in reality, it should definitely be in that conversation. It's so close to being a complete season, and if it wasn't for the little problems that I pointed out, I don't think any other season would have been able to top this one. Season 1 of High School DxD completely surpassed my expectations, and it's honestly underrated, and it's a classic. That video is finally over. The script for this video is by far the longest one, coming in at a whopping 5,000 words. That's 1,000 more words than the previous holder of this record. But it's been really nice to get back into High School DxD. I haven't started season 2 yet because I really wanted to finish this video first so I could get all that I wanted to say out about season 1. But man, this season really made me want to watch the next season. I also decided to change the upload dates for the High School DxD, but it's just my voice videos. Trying to pump out 2 videos back to back is just way too much for me. Especially when one of the videos is like this, where a lot of effort is put into it. So I think it's better to space them out. And plus, those High School DxD but it's just my voice videos are really just a passion project for me. I just do them because they're really fun to make. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and start season 2 now. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.